This paper is Ubiquitous Computing for Animal Welfare, Envisioning Smart Environments for Kenneled Dogs. So this paper presents an ethnographic study of a dog rehoming center in the UK run by the charity Dogs Trust, and an ethnographic study is just a long-term in-depth study of people, or in this case animals, in a certain place. And the goal is to see how subjects behave in their own environment rather than in a controlled lab setup. The goal of this study was to find where a ubiquitous computing system could help improve animal welfare. They're not proposing a specific system or specific technologies, but they're theorizing how such a system could help in an animal welfare situation. The paper was done by researchers at the Open University in the UK. It was presented at Ubicomp 2014 and has been cited 21 times. The paper starts with a discussion about animal welfare and some of its challenges. First, they point out that there's more to welfare than just removing negative factors from an animal's environment. You also have to add positive things back in. So for example, you can't just remove a dog from a dangerous place and give them food. You also have to give them opportunities for exercise and mental stimulation and socialization. When it comes to measuring welfare, this is partially done by analyzing biometric data. Sometimes this kind of data is hard to gather and hard to interpret. And it's hard, not as in they don't know how to do it, but hard as in it presents some challenges. So for example, when gathering data, you can't always observe every animal, especially in a place like a kennel where there's a high ratio of dogs to humans. You can't always be looking at every single dog. And when it comes to interpretation, there are some biometric indicators that can be ambiguous if they're looked at in isolation. So for example, increased heart rate can be a positive thing or a negative thing in a dog, depending on the context. The paper mentions some improvements to quality of life that ubiquitous computing can bring. For example, wearable health monitoring can help at-risk people outside of a healthcare environment, and ubiquitous computing brings more natural interaction methods. And the authors wondered, can you apply this to animals? That brings them to the overarching field of animal-computer interaction, and this is just designing computer interactions with animals as the users. And this brings some unique challenges, and the paper mentions 3 research challenges in specific. For one thing, not only are you tailoring to an entirely new species, but you also have to consider different breeds, as well as individual differences in the animals. Also, when you're designing for these animals, you want to use a participatory design process, but you're trying to get feedback from nonverbal users, which is a challenge. Thirdly, when you're doing an ethnographic study with animals, you're usually depending on human mediators that are very knowledgeable about the individual animals. However, in an environment with a lot of dogs and not as many humans, you can't always do this. Now, the paper doesn't directly answer these research questions. It's just intended as a springboard for discussion of how these challenges could be met. The study itself took place over 4 months. They visited the center 2 to 3 times a week, taking 3 to 4 hours per visit, and they recorded all their observations, and they spent some time interviewing the staff. And they asked them some general questions like the daily routine and the welfare of the animals, but more specifically, they asked them about the ways that they recorded and managed information, what kind of information they recorded, how they shared it and communicated it, that kind of thing. They also asked the staff the areas that they thought that technology could have the most impact in animal welfare. They summarized their findings in 3 different areas of potential applications: ambient interactivity, pervasive monitoring, and information management. Ambient interactivity addresses 2 different issues. For one thing, that high ratio of dog to humans makes it hard to give every dog sufficient attention and entertainment. So some kind of ambient interaction device, like a gamified food dispenser, could increase stimulation that you're giving to the dogs without making the human carers more responsible for interacting with them and spending more time. Second, being able to control their environment is a key part of animal welfare. So some kind of interactive controls could help provide that to animals. So if you provide a dog a way to close windows when they're uncomfortable, you'll increase its welfare overall. Pervasive monitoring is also related to that high ratio of dogs to humans. You can't always be observing every animal, so your biometric data is going to be incomplete if you're only relying on human observations. The authors propose embedding sensors in the dog's environment and also in wearable tags they can put on their collars and things like that. And this would facilitate data gathering even when you can't directly observe them. So if your caretakers are looking after other dogs or it's after hours, you can still be analyzing the dogs. One key part of biometric data that the authors mentioned, or that the staff mentioned, was that dogs' sleep pattern is an indicator of their overall health. But since they sleep mainly after hours, you can't always monitor this. So some kind of computerized pervasive monitoring would help solve that issue. But even with the data that they currently gather, the staff members noted that information management is a challenge. Currently, they use a system of moving papers to and from different bulletin boards as the dog moves to different areas of the rehoming center. This makes it easy to misplace information and difficult to quickly access contextually relevant data. The authors propose a ubiquitous computing solution with electronic bulletin boards that automatically display information relevant to the individual dog and context. So, if you have a dog and it moves to a different part of the rehoming center, the bulletin boards in that area automatically update with the dog's new information. And depending on the room, you get the information that's most relevant to you. So, in the kitchen, information about the dog's dietary information would automatically show up, whereas in the area where the dog walkers are getting ready, it would show the dog's exercise routines, or that kind of thing. So this paper, as I said, didn't advocate some specific system, so the impact is more on the follow-up work. Now, there was no direct follow-up on creating a ubiquitous computing solution in a kennel setting, but the authors have done more general ACI research in animal-computer interaction, and they developed some prototypes and theories that could eventually contribute to such a system. So, for example, they developed a framework for assessing animal-based controls called the Method for Evaluating Animal Usability. They also did a study analyzing how dogs interact with existing switches and things like that in a human environment, and that led them to prototype some more dog-friendly switches. And they also addressed the issue of wearable biometric tags. So some of the current biometric tags actually change the behavior patterns of the animals that wear them. So you're going to get inaccurate data. So they looked into creating some more wearable tags to be less intrusive into the animal's life. Overall, I think this is a valuable paper, mainly because it isn't trying to jump straight into designing a flashy new system. It's trying to identify areas that a future system could be most valuable in. I like that it gives a good overview of animal welfare and its challenges, and when they give practical application areas, they tie these back to the welfare principles. For example, when they talk about ambient interactivity, this ties back to the need for stimulation that an animal has. And when they talk about pervasive monitoring and information management, that ties back to the challenges in dealing with biometric data for a lot of animals at once. I'd say the main drawback for the paper is that there wasn't any follow-up prototype system. It didn't necessarily need to be in this paper, but I think it would have been helpful if there was some kind of prototype ubiquitous computing system that they tried, at least on a small scale. It would have been good to justify the ideas they put forth, and I think it would have been enlightening. However, I think this is a valuable paper overall.